And he said, hey, I walked in and there's water all over. I'm like, okay, how much water? Like, where is this at? He's like, the entire apartment. I'm like, how much water? He's like, like 3 inches. I don't know. I'm like, oh my gosh.
That's Scott Dixon, a rental property owner and a popular YouTuber on the DIY maintenance channel, Everyday Home Repairs.
So just the cheap, sticky tiles, and I've kind of tiled the base of the vanity, kind of make it a little more resilient where it can take some water and it doesn't blow out the bottom of that cabinet.
In this episode, you'll learn about Scott's preferred plumbing materials for easy maintenance.
PEX is the go-to in my area. Very, very flexible, easy to work with, easy to repair, easy to add on to.
How Scott avoids problem leaks and water issues in rental properties.
Getting the eyes on, running the water at each of your fixtures. That is the biggest thing that will save you money.
And the importance of preventative maintenance.
Just a simple tightening of a small nut often could save you hundreds or thousands of dollars later on.
Now we're going to dig into all of that and more. So Scott, I've been thinking back about my rental business, and over the last 12 months, some of the biggest expenses I've had, anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000, and some of the biggest headaches I've had have had to do with the plumbing in some of my rental properties. And so I said, I need to talk to Scott. Scott's a rental investor. He's also got a YouTube channel with almost 1 million or over 1 million subscribers. Almost.
Don't get ahead
almost.
All
right. Okay. We're almost there. I'm already giving it to you, but Everyday Home Repairs is close to 1 million, talking about home maintenance. So I wanted to get your feedback and just have a discussion with you about how we can make our rental properties more bulletproof, more emergency proof, so that our tenants have a better place to live, so that we have less hassle. And I guess I'll start with the story, a couple stories. One of them was I had a 4-unit building, St. Clement. I still have this 4-unit building. It was started with this a little simple leak under the kitchen sink, which happens, right? We could talk about what some of the reasons that happens. Tenants are not home for a day or so during the weekend. This leak becomes a bigger leak. And even so, like, we probably could have fixed that leak and fixed a little bit of the floor for $1,000 or so, maybe. It ends up though, this is an older building. And when we go to fix the flooring, they test the vinyl floor in the kitchen and learn that the vinyl floor underneath the top layer has asbestos. And so we not only have to fix the leak, we also have to remediate the entire kitchen. And so long story short, some of these problems are not just $200, $500 problems. These things can balloon into like $10,000 or $15,000 problems from one little leak. So I thought I would just go through the property with you and say, are there any off the top of your head, if we're thinking about preventing those kind of issues, like where are weak spots when it comes to our plumbing system that we can start as a landlord, start trying to identify some of these?
I guess let's start low, right? So let's start in a basement or crawl space if you have it in your area.
So we're here in the crawl space. It's actually pretty cool and comfortable under here once you get down here.
So just in general, if you have a basement or crawl space, there's a few things you need to look out for, and probably also a few expenses you need to pencil in. So if you have a basement, especially in our area in Illinois, the water table is pretty high. So you have a sump pump. So when it rains outside, you probably have French drains on the outside of your foundation, and then those are draining back to a pit, and then that's pumping it out from your home. Hopefully, that's pumping it out through PVC or corrugated way away from your home on some slope so it actually gets away from your foundation. Classically on rentals, maybe the PVC came out, so it's just dumping right at the foundation, then going right back in the pit, and then just dumping and going right back in the pit and just circulating, for days. So things like that you need to check. If you have a high water table, as we do, you need to check that. You need to have backup systems. You need to at least have one of those little water detectors that once it gets wet, it starts squawking like a smoke detector. Some of these minimum kind of preventative maintenance, because classically in my area, when we get a heavy rain, a 10-year storm where you're getting 4 inches or 5 inches in a 24-hour period, you go the next day and drive around and there's carpet in everybody's driveway. So that's just sump pumps that went out and they had a finished basement and that padding and carpet got soaked, and now they have a big remediation problem. So it's just something you have to pencil in, and you should have that on a regular maintenance check. So you should be maybe every 6 months or 12 months checking and maybe doing a cycle yourself, maybe dumping some buckets in that pit, making sure it triggers, making sure it pumps out, the shutoff valve or the backflow valve works. And that's not even talking about if you have a bathroom in the basement. So if you have a bathroom in the basement, most likely you're going to have what's called a trash pump. So that's taking the shower water, that's taking the toilet water, that's taking the vanity water, and that's also pumping it up to the level of your municipality so it can go out into the sewer system.
This is all about gravity, right? Water works with gravity. So in a basement, you're below where the street water drains to, or the drain line goes to. So you have to pump it out.
Every rental, I only had 2 out of my 10 over the years when I was actively managing my portfolio that had failures. Like it's almost guaranteed, especially if you're in the long haul. And the trash pumps are not pretty. That's some remediation, right? You're not gonna be like, oh yeah, we're just gonna dry out the carpets. That's some stuff in that water that you're not gonna want to just dry out the carpets, and your tenants are not gonna want you to just dry out the carpets. So it can add up into thousands and thousands of dollars. You bring the Serv Pros in, the Serv Pros are gonna cut out your drywall, are gonna cut out the carpet and remediate it, but that's it. Then you got to bring your crews in. You got to get your flooring back. You got to get your drywall back. You got to get your trim and millwork back. So it just blows up. For one, when you're buying your rentals, if you have a basement, just understand that is some additional complexity to your plumbing system. And if you hold that for 5 to 10 years, you're almost guaranteed that you're going to have some kind of issue.
Yeah, I don't know about you, Scott. I know we like to talk about our ideal rental. I know sometimes you find a deal that has a basement. It's just a good deal. But like for me, when I draw up a picture of my ideal rental, it does not have a basement for some of these reasons, because if you have a basement, it can leak in there. You can have issues. All these things are just one more item I have to check. I would rather have a crawl space in my area. And then, if it leaks, that's still not good, but it's not going to be carpet and furniture and things like that.
I agree. I don't mind the crawl spaces, and some places will have a sump pump. Some places will not. The crawl spaces are nice because you still have access. So if you ever want to add on to your electrical system, you need to do some HVAC work with your ducts, you have access to it. It's not fun hanging out in a crawl space.
It's actually pretty cool and comfortable under here once you get down here.
But you at least have access to it. It's not on a slab, but you don't have carpet, you don't have drywall, you don't have living space that if it gets wet, that's where all the expense is going to go.
When slab's another story, right? I do have one new construction rental we bought a couple years ago, and it's on a slab. Almost all the new construction these days is on a slab, at least the kind of starter home. And most of the drain lines are in cement, right? So if something happens with the drain, you got to jackhammer that thing up. And what about the water supply though? Water supplies are usually in the wall somewhere, or sometimes I don't even know where the water supply goes in a slab. Is it in the wall somewhere? Or how do you deal with a leak that we're just talking about right here?
So I had one on the slab. I think every area is different. I think every generation of build is different in terms of codes updating over time. I had one that came up just through the foundation wall, and then it went up through a drop ceiling and then down into the utility room. But some of those will travel a little bit in your slab. So you could have, like you said, if you need to get access to that, you might be not only removing your flooring, but really, cutting some drywall, which just puts a little bit of dust in the air, and really getting after it. And it can add up fast. So maybe crawl spaces are kind of that magic mix there, but you do need to know your area. Some areas it's dry enough. There's enough topography where you're running off. We are flat. We have a high water table. If you have a basement, you're basically just fighting the water table all the time, and you're pumping water out all the time. So you just need to start to understand your area. And then that's where you can kind of get your perfect property to minimize the chances of maintenance and chances of big repair bills down the future.
And good point. And no matter what you have, I really like this idea that you and I've had another video on, which I'll put a link to, of you got to do annual maintenance. You got to do every 6 months, and you have to have this list based on your property. So that's what I love about your advice is you have this annual list, but this particular property with the basement, you go and put the water into the pit to see if the sump pump works. It's just a check item that if you're doing it yourself, it could take an hour or two. If you pay somebody to do it, it could be, $100, $200, but that could prevent that $10,000 Serv Pro or $15,000 Serv Pro cost.
For sure.
That I've had to do that costs a ton of money. For
sure. And if you're not eyes on with that checklist, the yearly maintenance checklist, I would ask for pictures and video. So if they're exercising a sump pump, I'd ask for a little video just to make sure they can drop it in Google Drive, make it something super easy, but just to have that for your records. And it just encourages them to actually check each of those.
Trust but verify. I've heard that before. Yeah. I trust you, but I want to verify. Good idea. So all right. So we're starting at the bottom, we're moving up. And I guess while we're still down down there, I was going to ask you about just the overall type of material you use to supply the water. And maybe most people need to know, actually, maybe we need to differentiate between water supply and drain, because when you're sitting in the crawl space of the basement, you're going to look up, you got a lot of pipes going everywhere. So start with the 101 level, like just explain the difference between water supply and drain lines. And then maybe do you have any preference on your ideal water supply system?
Let's go to water supply. So water supply coming in, you'll have your main. Usually there's a shut off out at the street. Let's say that we're actually within some type of municipality, not running off a well. So you'll have a water shut off at the street. Now, if you want to be really hands-on like I was, you can have what's called a curb key, and that would allow you to actually shut water off at the street. If there's some catastrophe, your main water shut off inside your home wasn't working, that's going to be your next line of defense in terms of shutting something down if you have a huge gusher in terms of a leak. Some water companies don't want you to mess with that, so just a little bit of caution there. But that's going to come in from that meter or from that valve, and either the meter's out at that valve or it's inside your home, and then that's where they're reading off how much water you're using, and you're going to have a main water shut off right there. If it's an older property, you might have a gate or globe valve, so that is going to be a multi-turn valve. So you got to turn it multiple times when you shut it off. And another good indicator is it always leaks. Those stupid things always, when you like shut them down,
Yes,
it like always leaks. And then like you turn it just the right and it's like starts sprinkling out, and then you turn it one more and it stops leaking. Just know there is a little nut on top called the bonnet nut. Sometimes it's as easy as putting some vice grips on that, tightening it up, and you can stop that leak. But eventually that would be a good preventative maintenance, is just to swap that out into a ball valve.
How long did something like that? If you bought a 1960s property and it's the original one, it's time, right? I mean, it's been a long. Yep. But how often should you count on changing a valve like that?
If you have a multi-turn, I would just swap it out at the next reasonable interval. So if you have a turnover, and you have some time to get in there, you could put it on a list. And if you have a plumber over there doing some maintenance, it shouldn't be that much of a cost for them to swap that out. It's very, very easy, assuming it's accessible. So then the water comes in, and what is it, right? So if it's old, it might be old steel pipes, and those are not great. We have some of those in my area. Those do corrode on the inside, and then that corrosion balls up and plugs all sorts of different valves up, and eventually that just has to be completely removed. So be careful. If you have old pipes that look like they're painted or chipped, you're not probably going to see the corrosion on the outside, but you will on the inside. That thing's breaking down, and then it's going up, and the faucets won't turn on, and they kind of won't give full flow. That's because little corrosion chips are kind of building up into those valves. So if you go more traditional, some places do CPVC. I don't love CPVC, but it's still in some new construction. PEX is the go-to in my area. Very flexible, red, blue, and white lines. Very, very flexible, easy to work with, easy to repair, easy to add on to. That's probably my preference. Copper, I always liked forever. That was my go-to until I started to have a bunch of pinhole leaks in my own home.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah. So I thought copper was bulletproof, right? You sweat those joints and solder those joints, and that is the best thing you could get. Then I started getting pinhole leaks because of turbulent flow at some of the T's and intersections where they're a little sloppy with sweating those joints. The pros, right? Pros never do anything wrong. Well, in these cases, it ends up, it was, I had a ceiling that I had to replace. Luckily, the second failure was draining right at a drain in the floor. It was leaking right at a drain in the floor. I would say that PEX is my go-to. Copper properly installed can last for years and years and years and years and be great.
Here's a rental scenario for you. So you go buy a property that otherwise are like, okay, this thing's rent ready. The cosmetics upstairs are good, but it's tired. And you look in the crawl space and you say, okay, it's all got galvanized, supply lines to all the water. And you also see as it goes up into the bathrooms and the kitchen, it looks like the pipes up there are also galvanized, but it's working. Like you turn the water on, everything's working. How do you look at that as a landlord when you're looking at the cost of the property? Because on the one hand, I could get this thing rented as it is. On the other hand, you're like, well, this might be something I have to fix at some point. Like, would you go ahead and rip all that out? Would you just allocate the money? Like, how would you handle that as someone who knows about maintenance?
I'm sure every mixture of how acidic and what the makeup of water is in each area is different and how it reacts to the galvanized pipes. In my area, they don't last very long. So what I do is I look through, and you usually will see patches. So you usually will see some type of patchwork repair from the galvanized, whether you have a crawl space or basement. And that's just an indication that, yep, these are having some issues and they've had to patch leaks up and repair that. I always liked to take care of that. I'd replumb the whole house and I'd work it into my numbers, just knowing that I don't want the nagging maintenance items. I would like to get my rentals ready to go where I can minimize the service calls and also just give a better experience to my tenants. They don't want things going out and messing around and in the middle of winter and some of these challenging times. So I would go ahead and get rid of that in terms of if it was old galvanized. We have early 1900s home type of thing that will still have some very old water lines in them. And it's probably time to update.
I've had a lot of properties where early in my career, I did not do that. I went the other way and I'm like, well, eventually I know I have to fix it. It's an old house. I would now allocate the money and say, all right, even if I didn't have the cash up front, like let's say I bought the property, I'm like, all right, I spent a bunch of money fixing $30,000 worth of other stuff. I would say, like, all right, in the next 2 years, I'm allocating that money, any cash flow I have, any extra cash I have, I'm going to fix this because I've just found like older properties, as I've looked at the maintenance expenses I've had on my properties, I'm basically going to spend that money, but I'm going to spend it at the worst time. I'm going to spend it when it's an emergency. I'm going to spend it on the weekend. Whereas if I could proactively get a bid from a plumber, I could say, hey, give me your best price. It's not an emergency. Come out here, the next 6 weeks when you have some dead time, then you can get the job done well. It's not an emergency. It's not after hours cost. So I'm a convert in terms of spend the money on preventative maintenance, because if you're going to hold it as a buy and hold investor, it's going to pay off.
And I wouldn't say, starting off, and you two, we didn't all have infinite funds where right away we were fixing everything we wanted to, but I would batch that. So on one of my triplexes, I had a drop ceiling and I was just going in, I was updating and doing a little work and replacing the entire drop ceiling. So I just took that as the opportunity of, okay, now we're going to have full access to the HVAC systems and the plumbing systems and the electrical systems. So let me batch in some of these updates I want to do just for long-term, make this asset all that it can be and to minimize the amount of repairs and money I need to put into it.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about the other side. We have water coming in and we've got everything else in the plumbing system going out. And one of the expenses I've heard a lot of other people have, are older properties that have sewer lines between the house and the road that end up failing. Either a tree roots get in there or just collapses. Can you speak to maybe how you avoid that on the front end by knowing about a problem before you even buy the house? And then also, what do you have to do to fix something like that?
Yeah, so those kind of go into, we get a normal inspection before purchasing, or at least most people did. Some people were waiving that over the last 12 to 18 months. Not recommended. But then there's some of these specialty inspections that you could, right? You could dive deeper and put a camera down the main trunk to make sure there's no roots getting into it. In our area, we still have some clay pipes. And the challenge with that is, just think of a tree, right? So whenever there's a small leak in your main sewer line coming out, that's a source of water. So if a tree's roots even get a little sense of that, obviously they're going to follow that, right? And more roots. And this is a continuous water source of nutrients for me. So next thing you know, the lines just fill up with roots. And you can go through and chop those out. There's some specialty tools that they can send down and chop it off, but that's all band-aiding. It's just going to come right back, and then it's going to clog up with toilet paper and all kinds of good stuff and just keep giving you clogs. So getting a specialty inspection and actually running cameras down those lines, especially if it's an older home, if you know this is something in those areas that is a problem, because that quickly adds up to $5,000, $7,000, $9,000 in terms of getting that trenched out and completely replaced with updated PVC out to the city.
Good call. I'm hearing a lot of this as I'm talking about it. Older houses have a lot of extra problems, and some of the extra problems are supply lines, drain lines. I mean, it can add up. This is how you can go from a house that seems like it'd be like $20,000, $30,000 in repairs to like $100,000 in repairs all of a sudden, because if you really count on replacing a lot of this stuff, it can add up. So you just have to know that about an old house.
Yeah. And you never think, starting out, if you never think that, right? You're like, come on, Oh, right. I got like 3 units staggered on top of each other in an old farmhouse and all old systems, and the HVAC systems are all in the attic and on top of everything else. And you have pans that drain out. And anytime you just have all this complexity of systems, and especially when you have tenants on top of each other where this drain line has to work to take the water out there. And if it plugs up at all, it overflows right into the ceiling of your downstairs tenant. Those things just happen. In my area, in any place you're having a serious winter, we go through, and classically, because it's a student rental area, if it's winter break and if we get a cold snap during winter break, all heck breaks loose, man.
Yes, us too. Yes.
It goes crazy because students will turn off their heat and no one's monitoring it, and they'll go down to below freezing, and then pipes will just start bursting. So PEX is more forgiving to that. It's not infinitely forgiving, but it's much more forgiving than copper. Copper's not going to take too much expansion before it'll just blow open, and then you have a huge problem. So we've had massive failures where you'll drive by and there's just towers of ice coming off apartment buildings, which is something you'd never think you'd see, but it happens, especially in kind of the winter areas. So you need to be careful on that. Now, if you have Airbnbs and stuff and you have a connected house, you have Nest thermostats, August door locks, whatever that is, definitely monitor those temperatures. If you have an opening or if you have any vacancy, leverage already having a Wi-Fi connection to that and already having everything monitored where you make sure you understand the temperature inside. I had that happen once and I was super close to the water line blowing out. The faucet just started to leak and started to fail. And I went into the apartment and the apartment was 31 degrees Fahrenheit. And I just caught it in time. And it could have been a huge issue.
Yeah, that'll make you worry or be more cautious. And I'm going to keep beating that like a dead horse, this maintenance checklist item. But if you're a landlord, you got to have these reminders. And for us, we're not quite as cold in South Carolina. Obviously in Illinois, it's a lot different. But every time we hit like a 20 degree or below spell, even though we have property managers, we call the property manager and say, hey, have you communicated with the tenants to let them know they need to leave their heat on or, drip a faucet? And it's just like, those are little things. And yes, you might say, well, that's an annoying part about being a landlord, but it's a little thing you can do to prevent huge problems. And it can just be a phone call, a text, call your tenant, let them know, make sure they're there. If they're not there, go turn the heat on, whatever.
Don't expect that your tenants understand HVAC systems and plumbing. So don't, and not to put anybody on the bus, but just assume that they probably don't have much of a baseline. My old corporate days, I had a guy at work came over and said, hey, my landlord's giving me a hard time. He wants me to pay for all this damage in this condo that I was living in. I'm like, what happened? And he's like, well, I was overseas during winter break and I was checking my webcam to check on my cat that was in this condo. And I noticed the ceiling had collapsed. And I was like, oh, what happened? He's like, one of the water, it seemed like the water main busted open and the ceiling just started collapsing in the kitchen. I'm like, okay, did you turn the heat off? He's like, well, yeah, when I was out of town, I turned the heat off. I'm like, okay. I'm like, wait a minute, but your cat was inside and you turned the heat off. So it's just like multiple levels of like, I don't know if you fully thought through this. And yeah, you might have to pay for that.
Yeah. We're going to prevent this if we can, but then we're also going to think of ways to make it as bulletproof as possible. So I'm kind of skipping around here, but you talked about the main valve to the house. I've had a conversation with other landlords who almost went to the extreme where they're like, I like to put valves everywhere, not only like at the main, but also like in bathrooms, or if you have multiple units, just make sure you have it really easy to access. And speaking of, if there's water leaking everywhere, if you could turn it off in like 2 or 3 minutes, you prevent a lot of damage, but a tenant might not know where to do it. You're on the phone with them. So like, have you ever done that on any of your properties or thought about putting valves in other places where a tenant could just turn water off to the bathroom or the kitchen or something like that?
I have not added additional ones. If you're replumbing a house and you're doing it in packs, one of the things is, are we going to just branch off a 3/4 line and then go a few directions for a 1/2 inch and go to a vanity? Or are we going to go down to a common manifold, and every water line, every cold and every hot is going to have an individual branch, and then that goes to a manifold with a shutoff. So you can shut off every single little branch. So it's super handy. It costs a little bit more, but it is great for serviceability later on. Just showing your tenants where the main water shutoff is and what that does can help you. So I had an instance like that where, I was working my normal job and I got a text message and he said, hey, there's water all over the apartment. And it was a first floor slab. So I called him right away and he said, hey, I walked in and there's water all over. I'm like, okay, how much water? Like, where is this at? He's like, the entire apartment. I'm like, okay. I'm like, how much water? He's like, like 3 inches. I don't know. Like, I'm like, oh my gosh. Okay. So we need to get this shut off. Can you hear water? He's like, yes, I hear water. I'm like, okay, where's it at? Let's go back there. So he went back to the utility room and he's like, yeah, I can see water spraying everywhere. I was like, okay, we need to find the shutoff valve. And so I had to walk him through, but I never had showed him ahead of time. So he's kind of like, I don't know if I can find it. I'm like,
you must find it. We must walk through this.
So what happened is it was CPVC. It was maintenance items, that kind of a jungle mess of plumbing that I should have updated. And one of those CPVCs, the main water valve snapped, the main water line, and it just blasted water and blasted lasted water for, I think, hours. So that was a pretty big repair bill, let's say, to get that all remediated and get it back to normal. So just showing them where that's at and kind of what it does, I think helps out. Other main areas that you're going to have issues, like you said earlier, is underneath the sinks and underneath the vanities. So there are small water shutoff valves there for your hot and cold lines. And again, those can be old, right? The multi-turn old ones that are leaky, they don't even work. So that is a great preventative maintenance that you can batch and get modern quarter turn shutoff valves in there. And that's going to help you reduce the chance of issues in the future.
Good recommendation. All right. So we're up in the main part of the house. We've gotten out of the basement and the crawl space. I'm thinking about, sinks. I'm thinking about toilets. I'm thinking about showers. Anything else you can think of that any stories you've had of maintenance issues and maybe things that we could do to prevent some of these issues for our tenants and for our landlords?
The sinks and the vanities on your checklist, filling up the entire sink and then draining the entire thing down, flushing a lot of water down through your vanities and also your kitchen sink is great. It tests your system, tests the P-traps, make sure everything's tight, running your faucet, right? Running hot, running cold. You'll be amazed on how many leaks you'll find. And unfortunately, if somebody's lived there for multiple years, it's almost guaranteed you're going to find at least a slow drip leak. And that's your P-traps, your strainers, which is that basket on your kitchen sink that attaches to the sink, and then your stopper valves on your vanities, and then over to your water lines. And they just loosen up a little bit over time. And people pack so much stuff under there, they don't really see it, right? And then there's water, and then you blow out a base of your vanity or your kitchen, and then maybe it gets into your flooring. So what I've done, and also if you have some damage, I've used sticky tiles. So just the cheap sticky tiles, and I've kind of tiled the base of the vanity. And I've also used like Flex Seal to make a rubberized tray in the vanity to make it a little bit more resilient. And actually did videos on the channel on both of those different ones on how to repair if you have a little bit of damage, you kind of get to looking good. And then also how to kind of make it a little more resilient where it can take some water and it doesn't blow out the bottom of that cabinet.
Yeah, I like this conversation around not only thinking about plumbing and fixing valves, replacing old valves, but also just thinking about your property itself. Assume that problems are going to happen. If you have a place with water, water's eventually going to leak there. So this goes to a broader conversation about the type of materials you use. Like I like using these days LVP, luxury vinyl planks, or some kind of vinyl product instead of carpet wherever I can, because that's just easier to clean up if we have some issues, if we have water. You can't always do that, but like to me, thinking about all the materials that could get wet because they probably will, given a long enough time.
Yeah, agreed. The vinyl's much better than the laminate products. And I even, if I have a concrete floor, whether it's on a slab or it's in the basement, I do even glue down the vinyl just to make it that much more resilient. Like it can literally have water on top of it. You can clean it off and you're still okay.
Whereas if it's floating, it could get underneath there and then you gotta rip the whole thing up, right?
Yep.
All right, that's good. So we got vanities and sinks. What about toilets? I know you got a lot of good videos on your channel about replacing toilets and also showers. Any thoughts on there for rental owners?
I'm surprised how good toilets are, honestly. There's a lot of stuff going on there. It's holding water in the tank all the time. You have valves turning on and off. So I'm actually surprised on how good they perform. The wax, ring on the bottom of the toilet, it doesn't often fail, especially if your toilet is secure to the floor. Now, if your toilet's rocking because it's not secure, or maybe the base itself has corroded off, right, and nothing's really holding it down, sure, that's a telltale sign that you're going to have some issues. And just know that the toilets themselves, the rebuild kits, a complete rebuild of all the valves, all the flow tubes, the overflow hoses, that's like $20-25. So if you get an older place, your toilets are probably still good. They're secure, they're in place, but you can rebuild your entire tank and all the actual shutoff valves and flow and filling the tank, all that components you can build back up for $20 or $30 a toilet. And that's just a no-brainer, is to get those just starting fresh. And again, those are pretty darn resilient. You don't have to get the fanciest one that has 2 reviews on Amazon. Go with Odie, go with some of the tried and true brands that literally have sold millions and millions and millions of those units, and just build it back out. And that helps a lot. The one location I've had the most leaks is the seal between the tank and the base of the toilet. And there's usually 3 bolts in there that kind of wiggle loose over time. There's a lot of weight there. Sometimes people lean back when they're sitting on the toilet, so that kind of works it loose. And so that seal will break its seal, and then you'll just have like slow drips behind the toilet. And that's super hard to find because no one's really looking back there. So that can kind of eat away away at your floor and cause some damage.
I've had that happen. And I think the toilet problems I've had is just not installing it well. Not me, because I'm not the one installing it. That would be even worse, but hiring someone who didn't do a good job installing in the first place. It wasn't tight to the floor. It was exactly what you said. It was a maintenance installation error. I mean, if you get a good product, most of these, even the old toilets are pretty good. It's just, we didn't install it well. And then we had a leak that slowly, the tenant didn't see it. And now the whole bathroom floor is rotted out. We got to replace the floor, the subfloor. I've had so many instances young in my career where I think I'm saving a little bit of money hiring this person who's, oh yeah, I can do a toilet. I can install a toilet. And he doesn't really know how to do it. And then instead of paying somebody 150, 200 bucks, you're paying somebody 100 bucks. And then for 100 bucks, it's costing you $3,000 or $4,000. It's just repeatedly happened.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you're right that when you take an old toilet off and you're going to put in a new one or service it, having the ring that's supposed to secure everything down to the floor and make sure that PVC drain line's lined up and your wax ring's making a good seal, you can lose one side of that or the other side of that because you have kind of usually pretty thin metal on the channels for the bolts. So those will kind of break off and then you can't secure the thing down. Now they make repair rings that are pretty easy and it screws down to the floor. But if you're hiring that out, depending on who it is, are they just trying to get it as secure as possible, or are they actually, repairing it correctly?
All right. So we've done toilets. We've talked about supply lines, drain lines, kitchen sinks, bathroom sinks. Anything else you could think of that we should be paying attention to?
Yeah. So the shower tub can be a big issue. A lot of rentals, depending on where you're at, has the really cheap surrounds, right? Like the flimsy surrounds that have like sealed joints between each one of them. I'm just not a huge fan of that. Delta has, multi-piece surrounds that are a little stronger, but they have to be installed correctly. And to be honest, every time I've had somebody else install them, they're not installed correctly. You're supposed to kind of adhere them to the studs and put pressure on them for multiple days. And, people just don't do that. So that's going to have water in it every single day, spraying on it and opportunities for water to leak out. And if you're on the student rental side, one of my properties before I got it, the plumber that I had working on said, oh, I used to service this place. And the last landlord called me over like 3 times and said, hey, there's a leak from upstairs to downstairs. Can you go fix it? And you'd go there and no, it's pretty dry, nothing. I see the stain on the drop ceiling. And the third time he goes there, he knows there's no shower curtain in here. So it was an international student that was used to the bathroom being fully like tiled and drained.
Oh boy.
So they're just taking a shower, water going absolutely everywhere, and then going right down to the drop ceiling. So yeah, sometimes again, there's a little training and just checking things to make sure you don't have those issues.
Yeah. What did I say about trying to make your property bulletproof? Because if it can get wet, it will get wet.
Yeah.
So would you prefer like an ideal world? Obviously cost could be an issue here. Would you have a tile shower that you just totally rip out, install tile with a good backer board, something that's watertight instead of dealing with the plastic surrounds, things like that?
I've done the plastic many times over the years. They can be great. Tile if installed correctly, but because it can be also installed incorrectly and you get some issues. But tile correctly installed can, be fantastic for a rental and be about as bulletproof as you can get. The acrylic Delta series that scratches even, it can be pretty easy to scratch. It's acrylic, not even fiberglass. So I think tile is your best bet. It's going to cost you a little bit more. But if you're going to go with the multi-piece or rebuild kit, do not get the super flimsy walls. I mean, if you can hold it and it's like just it's in your hand flopping everywhere. No,
it's going to crack.
It's not going to be much better.
It's going to crack in the air.
Yes, it's not going to be good on the wall. Just talking about fixtures, your faucets for your vanities, your kitchen sink. I would pick a brand and I would stick with it. So I pick Delta personally. So with Delta, I have a valve right here as a mixing valve for your shower. So this mixing valve, it has been with Delta for like a decade, and pretty much any shower with a handle that mixes hot and cold uses this mixing valve. So if you have a failure, your handyman can go down to Home Depot on Sunday night, pick up a new one, turn the water off, swap it in, swap it out, and you're not having issue finding parts and waiting multiple days and it costing an arm and a leg. So I've worked with some newer investors and they get stuff off Amazon and it can be like a no-name brand. Bad move. Like bad move. So Delta, Mullen, Kohler, they're all super serviceable. And you can even just build a kit of your own and have, O-rings and have some of those valves just ready to go, because you might have 10 or 20 of those same faucets, and it just helps you to troubleshoot that and keep your cost a lot lower. So I would pick a brand and stick with it. Personally, I like Delta.
I was going to ask you the brand, so I'm glad to hear that. My current plumber likes Delta a lot as well. We've used Moen in the past. The mistake I made, it seems like I'm making all the mistakes you're telling people not to do, but we would buy the cheap brand at Lowe's or whatever. Oh, that one, this faucet's $150 for Delta.
Yeah,
and this was $80, $89.
Yeah.
Let me go with that one.
Yeah.
Mistake, $60, $70 on the front end has now cost me, another $1,000 over the next 5 to 10 years. So yeah, I have to touch the fire to learn, unfortunately, Scott. That's just the way the stubborn brain works. But yeah, I learned the hard way.
And if you're DIY, if you're hands-on and you're really doing some of the repairs, which is what I did, for my first kind of decade of investing, I would build out a kit. So I have a Milwaukee pack out kit. And in that kit, I have my Teflon tape. I have a whole kit of multiple size O-rings. I have flat washers. I have silicone grease to grease up those O-rings. I have multiple cutting tools so I could cut open a pipe really quickly, which are called auto cutters. So I have a 1/2 and a 3/4 inch auto cutter. Shark bites. So shark bites are a type of fitting. This is a little shark bite.
Of course, you got that on your desk right behind the video. You've got valves and pipes.
Yeah. So having one of those, or this is a slip coupler. So this slip coupler, it's a pretty big one, but you could have a few different sizes. If you had a pinhole leak in a copper line, or if you had an issue with your PEX, you can literally cut that open, hopefully turn off your water, cut that open, slip that past, even if you don't have much movement in the pipes, and button that back up. And that fix, I think, is permanent. Some people say temporary, but it's good for years and years and years. So, extremely quickly you can do that. I also have caps where I could just cap a line off, or having a 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch shark bite ball valve. Even if the water line is active, you can cut it, put that ball valve on it, and shut it off. And you just stopped what it could be a massive, massive issue. And shark bites are so flexible in terms of the pipes that they can work on. Just having a few different fittings in your Milwaukee pack out kit or whatever kits you're building out can be really a lifesaver, and it just saves you trips to the home improvement stores. It just, it's something to really invest in. So if I ran across something 2 or 3 times, it was going in the kit type of thing.
Being organized, it pays off. I think we're going to have a lot of people listening who are going to be DIY folks. There's going to be others who are like me, who are, to an extent DIY, but then you hired the plumbers out. I never fixed any of that stuff myself. But either way, this video and what we're talking about here, this episode, is so helpful. I hope people are taking notes, because if I would have heard something like this as a new investor, I think it would have changed my mindset, Scott, hearing you talk about this, where I would have taken more seriously the little things, the quote, little things of the valves you choose, the faucets you choose, the materials you choose. It's just a series of these little decisions with your plumbing that literally will save you tens of thousands of dollars over the next 10 to 20 years. It's such a no-brainer, but it's something that I wish I would have considered and taken more seriously earlier on.
Inherently, though, the small but mighty investor, right, should be playing the long game. So if you're playing the long game, all those small decisions, all those things that add up, just when you're painting the walls and getting your Sherwin-Williams color down so you can easily get the paint you need to go ahead and update your place. It's the same with plumbing, just having your standard Delta or Moen or whoever you're going with, having some of those repair items, especially as your portfolio grows. I think that's going to pay dividends down the road. The thing that'll pay the most dividends is the preventative inspections. Getting the eyes on, running the water at each of your fixtures, making sure the P-traps are tight, making sure your shutoff valves aren't leaking. Just a simple tightening of a small nut often could save you hundreds or thousands of dollars later on. Just checking your toilets. Is that tank solid, or do I need to tighten that up? Is the water line going to the toilet dripping? All those things, that is the biggest thing that will save you money. So getting eyes on, if it's not you, somebody you really trust, and trying to get pictures and videos of that and document it, that is going to save you the most.
Well, speaking of that, to help everybody out, if you take seriously doing this preventative maintenance, which I do, and I know Scott does as well, we worked on a checklist together, a preventative rental property checklist that you can follow. You don't have to reinvent the wheel on this. You can just print this out. You can have a PDF on your computer every year, every 6 months. Go through this checklist. All the things we talked about here are on that checklist. And so if you look in the video description or the podcast description, there'll be a link to that. Check that out. And it's something Scott and I worked on together that I hope will be very helpful for you. And Scott, I want to give you a chance. You have an amazing resources now with multiple channels. I want to give you a chance to just tell people where they can hang out with you. I'll put links to everything in the podcast and the video description as well.
Great. We've been building out everyday home repairs, so really focusing on just this. So kind of taking on those projects around the time, and we just try to enable people to save time and money. So Everyday Home Repairs is the main YouTube channel and TikTok and Instagram and Facebook page, all the socials. And then we have Everyday Solar, where we're diving into kind of solar projects, and whether it's, I just did my first DIY grid-tied house roof-mounted system. So that was a fun one over on that channel. And then we dove into Everyday Shed, which is storage shed. So building out your own storage shed and in your yard, kind of the classic, that's like a classic DIY, you get your first house, you want to build a shed. So we're diving into that and kind of doing a lot of cool stuff over there. So any of those channels will continue to crank out the content.
Well, your channels are all on the top of my bookmarks where if I want to figure out something, I'm going to Everyday Home Repairs, and I'm waiting for Everyday ADU. Like, when are you going to have showing people how to build the ADU in their backyard? If you got Everyday Home Shed, I'm sure the ADU is coming next, right?
Everyday barn dominiums I'm kind of infatuated with. So that might make it first over ADU, but shed could probably stretch into some ADU stuff.
Good. I love it. I could see the Everyday empire growing. Very good. Well, thank you for your time. This has been awesome. Really appreciate it and look forward to seeing you soon.
You bet, buddy. See ya.
In this episode, we went deep into plumbing maintenance to save you thousands of dollars on your rental property. But plumbing is not the only thing that'll cost you time and money. I recently spent over $12,000 replacing a heating and air unit. So in my next video, I talked to Matt, the lumberjack landlord, about 8 lessons I learned about heating and air units, including how to select the right equipment and how to do preventative maintenance to save money. If you're watching on YouTube, you can click on the thumbnail above me here, or you can click on the podcast or the YouTube description link below. See you in the next video.